As I said earlier, this is a very special Shabbat, Shabbat Shira, where the Israelites are released from Egypt, from their enslavement, and they make their way to cross the sea. And tomorrow we'll read the Shirat Hayam, the Song of the Sea. It's a glorious Shabbat after waiting for so long, after so many years of enslavement, after so much grief and pain. And it begins with the word Vayehi. Vayehi b'shalach paro et ha'am. And Pharaoh, and it came to pass that Pharaoh sent them away, meaning the Israelites. And in the Talmud, in Megillah, it says, every time it says the word Vayehi, it means distress. So it's only a very Jewish thing to say at the height of the moment when the people of Israel finally have arrived to freedom, or on their way at least, it's a moment of distress. We can never get 100%, of we finally made it. So the question is, why do the rabbis attribute this opening pasuk, Vayehi, as a moment of distress? And I'd like to offer two commentaries that shed some light on this moment of why it was considered a little bit distressing. And the first is by Rav Tzadok HaKohen, who says, what was the distress when they left Egypt? One of the main purposes he teaches of the plagues was not, of course, only to convince Paro that it was time to let the Israelites go, but to teach the people of Israel to have faith, that God was going to perform signs and wonders to teach them that they would be able to leave and follow God and follow God's word and make their way out of Mitzrayim. And that their yearning for that kind of freedom would be really, really strong. But what does the Rav Tzadok HaKohen teach about this verse, Vayehi, the distress is? If you notice about the verse, and actually it's often translated as when the Israelites were set free. But bishalach actually means when they were sent out, meaning that Paro sent them out. So it wasn't actually they who wanted the freedom. It was Paro who wanted them out because he wanted the plagues to end. And so what he teaches, Rav Tzadok HaKohen, is that the hope was that they would have a gradual development of yearning for freedom and a strong desire to free themselves from the shackles of Mitzrayim, from Egypt and its depravity. But in the end, after all the plagues and wonders and miracles, the Torah tells us that Paro sent the people away, meaning that the Israelites did not leave Mitzrayim on their own free will, but they were sent away, which was indeed a cause of distress, meaning that they hadn't yet developed the hunger for the freedom. They were enveloped in the experience of what it meant to stay in Mitzrayim. And so that's what he teaches is one form of the distress in this very moment. And Rav Auerbach teaches a different notion of what the distress was. He says this is an indication of what happens so often when striving for a certain goal is finally realized, like you finally get what you've been praying for so long. However, once the goal is realized, it seems to shrink in importance. That you've been striving and striving and striving, and you finally arrive. And once you arrive, it actually gets degraded, the goal. And it becomes a part of the everyday reality, and all the beautiful dreams that you had hoped for about that striving, that goal, then kind of fade into the distance, and all you can see ahead are the problems. And he said that was also true about the people of Israel, that in this moment, when that goal had been realized, all they could see, and we know that to be true in the Torah, is they complained, and they, it wasn't like they were just like, let's do it. There was a lot of hesitation, ambivalence. And so what Rav Auerbach teaches is that when we have this striving, finally we arrive, and then all of a sudden what we were striving for kind of seems to fade in the distance. And in many ways, these two commentaries, I think, speak to different notions of complacency, right? Is that one is a complacency of actually not having a striving at all, right? That the Israelites, in some sense, were enslaved to the status quo. What Rav Tzadok is trying to teach is that they hadn't developed the longing to want to leave, even though they cried out. They didn't have the hunger. And they were, in a sense, habituated to their lives in Mitzrayim. And we see that later also. They were like, be better back there, where we knew what was happening. And so that's one version of complacency where we actually accept it, that in some sense we diminish our hunger for longing, for freedom, for even dreams to exist. And then the other version of complacency is when we strive for so long and arrive at something, all of a sudden we get complacent with where we've arrived to, and we only see the hardship ahead. And both of these notions of complacency, I think, are deeply real in our lives. It's always like we arrive at one moment and then we think, well, either we can only, we've been talking about this a lot about Israel, like arriving at the dream of a state. And then maybe the dream that was in the Declaration of Independence is like, there's a complacency about that dream, which is so powerfully and beautifully articulated. And true in our own personal lives, too. You could say that as the same as the American dream also. But in our personal lives, too, that we forget how grateful we are for having that arrival. And then we get kind of numb to that striving that we arrive to. And then secondarily not secondarily, but also that we are so numb to the desire to long that we are satisfied with the status quo. And I think many of us are feeling that way in the world with so much challenge and horror that it's like we forget that we should be longing for something else, that we should want something else, that we should want peace, that we should want love over hate, that we should want a country that treats everyone with dignity and care and support. And Shabbat is really meant to be a tikkun to those versions of complacency. It's at once a time where we're not striving on the outside. We actually feel grateful for where we arrived to. We're only here, just now. Grateful for having arrived in this moment of sacredness, of pause, to say, wow, where have I been this week? And to kind of cherish the now of this arrival. And simultaneously, Shabbat is the Me'ein Olam Haba, a taste of the world to come, where we imagine that the world could be otherwise. And each week, no matter how hard the week is, we come back to that taste that says, it may be where we are now, but there is another dream that's out there. And we should awaken that longing, that hunger for that vision of the world. So on this Shabbat Shirah, that distress, I always think the rabbis the tsuris that they're pointing out here is to teach us to not feel that way, right? They're telling us these commentaries to say, no, don't get into that place. Find an alternative. And so I pray on this Shabbat Shirah that our distress, or how the rabbis describe the distress, is actually an invitation to long and dream just like Shabbat is meant for, and to also recognize how far we've come, and that those two things actually don't have to be in tension. They can live with some kind of creative tension to actually help us not only dream, but realize what dreams already are here.